like to talk to you today about the Great Depression. Now, if you're going to look for it online, I guarantee you're going to come across a date, October 29th, 1929. It's also known as Black Tuesday, the day the stock market crashed. Now, the stock market crash is not the primary cause. See, in the 1920s, America was doing quite well. Businesses were booming, the economy was strong, and Americans were investing in a lot of consumer products. And they started to use this new purchasing power they had called credit. And they would buy appliances for their homes and automobiles, and they do it all on time. And it launched this wave of consumerism in our culture, which drove the stock market up. Now, a lot of Americans were interested in investing in the stock market, but they didn't have the funds to do it. Until someone came up with this idea of using speculation to sell stocks. And so a lot of Americans were given the opportunity, when they wouldn't have had it before, to invest in the stock market. This is what we call buying on the margin. This is when a brokerage house would loan you the money with about 10% down, and you could buy large quantities of stock. And so a lot of Americans are going to jump on board and start investing their own money and money they were borrowing in the stock market. Well, with so many things in life, the more things are in demand, the higher the price becomes. And the same thing happened in the stock market. And what we saw happen was a lot of stocks started increasing in value very quickly. But there wasn't enough business to support that increase in price. And so the whole stock market became overpriced. Well, some investors panicked and started selling off in October. And this induced an entire panic sell where on October 29th, over 16 million shares of stock were sold, driving the price down. Unfortunately, the result, overnight, people lost their life savings and businesses closed. Unemployment's going to reach 25%. And when those loans that were taken out to buy all that stock or run those businesses couldn't be paid back, banks started closing as well. And when the banks started closing, people really panicked and they started rushing to the bank to try to get out their money. But there wasn't enough money in the banks. And when those banks ran out of money, they closed. And so we're set in a position where we have massive unemployment, people are losing their homes, and they're relying on churches and other organizations to provide, food for their family, and soup and bread lines became the norm in America. Economically, America experienced the perfect storm leading into the Great Depression. But there are four main causes. Overproduction of goods, both in agriculture and factories. Wages remained stagnant throughout the 1920s, creating a wage gap. Way too much reliance on credit. And finally, this was a worldwide problem. It just wasn't centered here in America. As far as a government response, there wasn't much of one. President Hoover believed in rugged individualism or laissez-faire, meaning government keep your hands off. He did pass the Hawley-Smoot tariff, one of the largest tariffs in history. However, Europe responded with tariffs of their own on our goods. And the Reconstruction Finance Corps was a plan to give money to banks, railroads, and other financial institutes that would hopefully stabilize incomes, but it didn't work. So in 1932, when Franklin Delano Roosevelt runs against Hoover for the presidency and he promises Americans a New Deal, they're all for it. They want the change. And his New Deal was comprised of the 3 R's: relief, recovery, and reform. Now, going into his first 100 days, he had to make a quick impact. So he closed the banks and set up a bank holiday and passed the Emergency Banking Relief Act, which said you cannot reopen your doors unless you're financially stable. He also passed the Federal Deposit Insurance Corps, which guarantees your deposits will not be lost even if the bank closes. And finally, the Security Exchange Commission was set up to regulate the stock market. But what about the unemployment? Well, this is where we get into FDR's alphabet soup, a series of programs meant to give immediate relief to the American people. Things such as the CCC, the PWA, the WPA, the TVA, the NRA, and the AAA. All temporary, but all providing some relief for American people. Let's not forget the farmers. They're dealing with their own problems in the West. The Dust Bowl. and a lot of them are migrating west to California with the hopes of finding new jobs. The Social Security system is probably the one program you're most familiar with. This is a system where payroll taxes are taken out of your income, given to the government, and then they return those taxes back to you as benefits upon retirement. For the first time, the government is taking control of the care of its people. The Great Depression went from 1929 to 1941, and while the New Deal and the 3 Rs definitely bought us some time, they didn't solve the Great Depression. In fact, the Depression didn't come to an end until World War II started and the United States entered that war. Just for a quick review, here's a list of some of the programs we discussed in Roosevelt's New Deal plan for America. Remember, each of these programs fell under one of the 3 Rs: relief, recovery, and reform. Well, that's about going to do it for the Great Depression. Hopefully you learned a little something. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you our next time around.